Hello, everyone. We are back again with another episode, and today we are going to be talking about a topic that I think a lot of us have faced and have gone through, and that is isolation. And we know as college students, we do get into some seasons of isolation. All of us handle it differently. We're really going to be digging into the scope of whether, and how this goes into our mental health and how this affects us spiritually as well. We're going to be sharing a bit of our experiences and asking some questions and just having a discussion. So we hope you guys enjoy. So the first question is, in terms of isolation, right? Has there ever been a time in your life where you have been isolated or felt isolated, and kind of what was your experience like? If you want to start us off.
Yeah. So I guess like an experience where I felt isolated is, I guess throughout my life I kind of had a lot of those moments, right, where I felt kind of alone in a way, and that's because we kind of live in a society where there's a lot of judgment, and in terms of my perspective, there was a lot of negativity, and I guess.
You kidding me?
Yeah.
How did you deal with it?
I mean, I'm still in the process of kind of just like learning on it.
That's fair.
Finding ways around it in a
Mm-hmm.
way. Like isolation is kind of broad topic thing.
Yeah.
But
And isolation is different for a lot of people and what they consider to be isolated and how long and what they consider it to be isolation. Do you have anything you want to add about your experience in isolation?
Yeah, I'll mention just like college for the first part. I've always been like a very extroverted person, and there's never been a time like if you know me, you know I know everyone. Yet I've still felt isolated, even though I maybe wasn't at a larger scale. But I think it really comes down to the quality of your peers and friendships rather than like the quantity. Like one great friend is better than like 600 just acquaintances, in my opinion. When it comes to isolation, it's so important to have someone like that you can count on and someone you are able to go through the thick and thin with, the good, the bad. And I just think about isolation, I think about college students, and especially where we go to school. We go to Rochester, New York, super cold. I bet if you did like a survey, most of the students here would say they're isolated in some aspect. Because everyone's just studying. There's not too much activity going on outside and stuff because it's always very cold. So isolation is just a huge, like big concern here, and especially at a lot of other universities as well. I know a lot of students feel isolated. So yeah.
Okay. Let me see. I think for me, isolation is really interesting for me. I consider myself to be an extrovert, and we'll kind of dig into introvert, extrovert, and how that kind of affects the period of isolation. But I've always been around a lot of people, right? I've always talked to a lot of people. I was a very social person, so that wasn't necessarily an issue of mine. But there was a time where God had wanted to isolate me specifically, where I had to do some inner working, some actual introspection, and I couldn't have, a lot of people around me during that time. And it wasn't necessarily because, I wanted to, but it was, necessary for growth. And my perspective on isolation, especially when I've, kind of chosen to go along with that process and kind of keep myself away from people, as I take that time to really reflect on the things that either I'm doing, the goals that I want to achieve, and kind of laying out the blueprint for that. And I think time in isolation helps you to see things a little bit more clearly without necessarily the view of everyone else's opinion, but also for you to be able to consult God about it, and to really get your gauge on how you need to proceed after this time in isolation, right? So sometimes you may be in situations of isolation where you're reevaluating your friendships, right? And I talk about this in my book. Are your relationships life giving or life draining? And I think we can kind of move into that next and talk a little bit more about it. But I had to reevaluate in my time of isolation. Are the people around me adding life to the things that I'm working on? Are they adding life to my vision? Are they adding life to my dreams? Are they adding life even to the simple things that I want to do? Not that they have to agree with me about everything, but is what they're saying compromising my destiny, right? Is it something where I know I'm feeling left drained after I talk to them about something? Or if I share an exciting idea with them, do they feel like enticed to correct me, or just feel, in their feelings about a goal or dream that I want to set out to achieve? These are things that you will, in your relationships, when you're not in isolation, start to pick up on. And it's important that in those times of isolation, you evaluate those conversations and say, hey, well, I kind of, hit a huge milestone, and this person actually kind of diminished what I said and, didn't really even congratulate me, but they're supposed to be a close friend of mine. I would reevaluate and say, okay, well, maybe they were going through something. Maybe I'm just, asking for too much, right? But there are certain times where I'm like, okay, I know what I did was big, but there wasn't a genuine celebration. There wasn't a genuine, agreement with my goal being reached. And I had to realize, like, yo, this person might not be who I thought they were, or they might not have the best motives or intention, or maybe it wasn't set out from the jump. And I just didn't pick up on it until the goal was reached. And I followed through on what I said I was going to do, and I see the reaction, and now I'm disappointed. So isolation helps you to sort of reevaluate the people in your life to make better decisions on what you do share and what you do kind of give out as information about your life, but also to protect you from things and dreams being harmed or diminished or even delayed because of the words that they spoke over it. So I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper into friendships during isolation. And I want to ask each one of you, this might be a little bit of a jump, but in terms of mental health, right? Things that we want to stay stable in, right? We want to continue to overall not be in a negative state in our mental health. What type of people do you need to have around you, either outside or even during those times of isolations? I guess depending on the type of person that you are. So, Jimmy, I know you mentioned that you are like an introvert, right? But what type of people do you want to be around you either during isolation or when you're out of isolation?
Yeah, I guess I want to share more on the second half of 2024, in which I kind of went in and out of isolation. Um, I would say in the past I used to be very introverted. I was very isolated. I did everything alone, and that was kind of intentional because of the society that we live in. And as I got to college, I became more extroverted, but I feel like for me, that was kind of, it could have been a mistake on my end because I didn't know who I was, right? And so as a result of not knowing who I was, my boundaries weren't set. I didn't know myself well enough. And so that negativity around me just flooded within. And so, like, I guess your question is...
Yeah, so like even with now you setting the boundaries, now you knowing kind of what you want, what are some of the characteristics of that person that could be Jimmy's friend?
Right. And so I guess what I believe in is kind of, you want to have people like you, what you said before is like you want to have people that are life-giving, right? And so I guess some characteristics in just, it can, like, for me, I don't have a lot of like standards in a way, and so like the bare minimum is just being there to listen, right? And so having someone there to listen to your problems and not even just like criticizing it or just offering advice, the bare minimum is just having someone to listen can make such a huge difference within the isolation period. Because then when you have people who criticize and give you feedback, and then you can't, because when you're in isolation, you're kind of, like you said before, like you're kind of, discovering who you are. You're kind of like growing, right? You're kind of sorting out thoughts, ideas, all these different perspectives that you've had, all these different experiences, your traumas, and all those dark moments and all those positive moments too. But you're trying to sort all these things out, and so I guess like having just people there to listen and not criticize too much, but those that give advice would also be helpful too. Yeah.
What do you think about that, Maxwell?
At least for me, I'm very like sensitive to energy, if that makes sense. So like there's a saying like you are who the people you surround yourself with, right? And I had this conversation with a couple of friends before that some people are just not like too sensitive to the energy around them as much. I think I'm at a point where I'm very like I respond very, very much so to the energy that's around me. So if there's a lot of positive energy, I will feel that and I will become like more positive. And the same side, the same is the same on the on the negative side. So I just try to be mindful of who I'm surrounding myself with now and try to protect my energy in a way, because it's very powerful, and you have to be careful with who you're surrounding yourself with. And at the same time, though, when I find myself in like a negative spot, it's tough because I always want to. I'm very social. I always want to be around friends. However, knowing myself and knowing how I respond to energy, I always feel a bit guilty, like going with with friends in a darker place, and that's something you shouldn't feel. You should always like reach out to the friends you have and love. They're there for a reason, for the good and the bad. However, it's important though to consider this idea of energy when thinking about isolation and friendships. And sometimes it's good to be isolated, like Caleb was talking about before. Sometimes you need that for self-reflection, growth, and those are just important things to consider when thinking about isolation. However, there is a big issue of social isolation on college campuses, and so many students are very isolated. In isolation, there was a report, and like with the Surgeon General, right, and social isolation is like the biggest issue regarding health in America. I believe it was something crazy along those lines, that it's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day, right? It's so powerful. So it's just something to always consider, and that's so important. Yeah.
So now that we've kind of discussed a little bit about our tactics for what we are looking for in relationships during isolation, protecting, energy, watching who we're surrounding ourselves with, how do we finally break out of the isolation, right? What are some practical strategies that we could give our listeners and viewers that could help them break out of isolation, maybe because they didn't know they were in it, or maybe because, they're like, okay, I want to be social again. I've done my, reflection. What are some practical strategies that we can give them? I can start with that. And I would say the first thing is to not just run on the phone and jump and talk to everybody, right? I have a hard time, and that's one of the ways that I need to really start getting a hold of myself about, because I constantly just talk a lot. Like, I can talk and I can talk and I can talk. But one of the things I had to realize was, okay, now that I've said my piece, now that I've let people know kind of where I am, right? Becoming an active listener has got to be one of the number one things I did after coming out of isolation, right? Hearing other people out for what they were going through, right? Standing in the gap for them, but also being that listening ear, like Jimmy mentioned. Another thing, though, that helped me break out of isolation was stepping into new groups that I never thought, I'd be interested in, or, trying things out that I always wanted to try out. Like, I know for me, at U of R, they have like a ping pong club. So I ended up going to like one of the meetings on a random Saturday, and I just ended up playing ping pong and meeting a whole new group of people. And yes, I can play ping pong, but I also felt like I was breaking out of the isolation because I was literally indulging in a new group that I never thought that I'd be, even playing with or just talking to. I'm usually not just on my lonely, but staying in my life-giving friendships, and I'm not necessarily branching out like I usually would. But I think that definitely helps to sort of change up the vibes, change up the scene. That I'm always talking to the same people. It's like, okay, well, I'm doing an activity that now requires me to engage and talk to different people, learn different habits, different lifestyles, and I think that kind of helps you break out of the restraints of isolation. But you guys have any other kind of steps people can use to break out of isolation?
That's something to say really quick. I think it's important to like learn how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. That's a big saying, and that relates to social isolation in regards to when you go out there and you put yourself out there. You're not going to be too comfortable at first, so you just accept it and give yourself a chance. Like, if you join a club or something, if you're a student, stay in there give it like a couple weeks. You'll start to enjoy it. You'll make new connections, and the more you continue to put yourself out there, the more you find people that you like, that you relate to, there's like, at least like, I'm a strong believer in the energy you put out is the energy you receive. And I think that works with relationships, and it's so important when it comes to social isolation, and not just sit in your room, do work all day. It's important to study and grind and get the job, but you also need to be social. You also need to talk to people. Even if you're an introvert, I know social connection's huge. You can have a lot of introverts here. I know they have a couple really close friends, and that's perfect for them. They don't need to talk to everyone, right? But by putting yourself out there, you're able to make those close friends as an introvert. I'm not sure if you would agree with that that ideology, Jimmy, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
I guess when it comes to breaking that out of the isolation, like what you said, I guess humans are social creatures, right? And I guess we love to socialize, but in like when you're coming out of isolation, you want to have some sort of boundary. You want to have some sort of like layer of protection in a way. And how I would describe it is that you're going back out into the world, right? And so when you go back out into the world, you're kind of there's a lot of things that you're gonna be afraid of, right? Because within like some people like introverts, right? Like myself, like I prefer isolation, and that is my comfort zone, right? But if I go out into the open, outside of my comfort zone, and I don't have a strong core, or if I don't have like a strong layer of like a shield around my mind, it's going to go negative in some way, right? And so like some tips, I guess, with when it comes to going out of socialization is, I guess, like having clear boundaries, I'd say, right? And so um, going out and explore, don't be afraid, things like that. Yeah.
That's good. I think a lot of well, let me not say a lot of, but my mom is a licensed clinical social worker, and growing up I was always hearing mental health terms. I was always into CBT training just by force of her, going and meeting with other clients and ending up, me reading paperwork and seeing what she's doing and stuff like that. But one of the things that was always written on, some people's paperwork, I guess, from when I was younger that I remember reading was the child is in an isolation mode, or the child has, been in a space where they haven't been around other people. So they start to, like, I would read the report sometimes, and I would see some of my mother's feedback she would give to like parents and things like that when she would do in-home counseling. And it would always be to try to get the student, or in this case, the kid at the time, involved in some sort of extracurricular activity, or trying to get them out of their bounds, or just spending more intimate time with the actual kid, right? So a lot of the times either the parents were working, or, they had a lot of trauma, and so the kid wasn't able to kind of heal from that, and so they already started to isolate themselves. But that's one of the things that I know that really gets people out of their shell, is switching and switching their environments. And that's one of the biggest things that I had to do growing up was, okay, I know I'm in an environment where when I grew up, I was obese. I was constantly in a place where I felt isolated just in who I was, just because I wasn't accepted by a lot of people, just because of how I looked, right? I would always get made fun of. And so I remember being, in the playground, and I just would not even go in and speak to people. I would just be with my headphones and listening, just because I had that fear of rejection from them. And I think a lot of us as kids have felt along the way some form of rejection, and I think that kind of plays a role into how we end up falling into isolation longer than we should have, or for reasons that are not necessarily for reflective purposes, right? And I think for me, a lot of it had to do with, feeling like I was the outcast, and knowing that, look, if I go and talk to these people, they're probably going to make a joke about my weight, right? They're probably going to call me a fat ass or something like that. And I didn't really know how to handle it, except but to, get angry, try to curse them out, or to really, be in a space where I could kind of fight them with my words. That was the only thing that I knew that I could do. But when it came to isolation, that was where I felt safe, right? It's just me and my thoughts and how I see things, and the music that I'm listening to, and the media that I'm digesting. But I just want to warn against staying in that mindset for so long, because you can get into your own perspective and not really have, not necessarily people clashing with them, but not have any challenge in the way that you're thinking, not have any challenge in the way that you're talking to yourself, if you stay in these modes of isolation for the wrong reason longer than you should. But
I got something to...
Yeah, go ahead, Maxwell.
Well, first off, Caleb, you're a great speaker, man. I always feel your energy when you're talking. But secondly, I'm thinking about when what you were talking about for some reason made me think about just isolation in regards to the mind and mental health isolation. And like, for example, you take someone who has everything figured out, makes so much money, even sometimes though they feel isolated. They don't feel like they're a part of the world because of their own mental health, whether it's anxiety, depression, whatever it may be. That mental health isolation is a similar thing in a way to social isolation. And it's all about, it all comes down to just biologically, like Jimmy was saying before, in group, out group is kind of just how we function as a species. It's like we're built on survival, right? And I think that whole philosophy applies to every sort of type of isolation. Everybody wants to be a part of wants to be a part of the group. You want to be a part of the community, right? Because that's how you're living. So that relates to a lot of like, when it comes to a lot of like entrepreneurs as well, the Alex Hormozi guy always says like at first you have to like struggle, you have to suffer for a bit because you're not part of that. You're not part of that group. You're not part of the in group, right? Because you're just doing your own thing. And that sort of all relates to this concept of isolation. I'm putting this on school because I know a lot of people can probably relate to that topic and the thoughts there, but that's just some more thoughts regarding isolation. Even the highest functioning people, right? Everyone experiences isolation to some sort of extent, so it's just important to consider all these sort of ideas.
Anything else, Chewy?
Yeah. No, I think. Yeah.
All right, I'll close this out. Well, guys, I just want to thank you all for listening and joining in for this conversation on isolation and how we can better manage it and kind of fight through the barriers of it in our college experiences. If you really liked it, make sure to let us know somehow, some way, either comment or wherever this is posted, let us know. Have a good one. Peace out.
Topics, whatever you want to see. If someone's watching this, we'll keep putting stuff out there for a bit. Hopefully we can learn more about podcasting and all that stuff. Yeah.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Thanks for watching.